Welcome to the Nonprofit Voice, a podcast series brought to you by NonProfit Pro, the go-to resource for nonprofit management and strategy. In each episode, we're going to sit down with leaders of nonprofit organizations, the people responsible for paving the way for our sector, along with key technology strategy partners who are transforming our industry. Here at the Nonprofit Voice, we'll have refreshing conversations in which we will all learn more about the convergence of nonprofit and technology. Be sure to follow us on social media and visit our website to find more episodes of the Nonprofit Voice. And you can download all of the Nonprofit Voice episodes on iTunes, Google Play, or Spotify. We will have all the links down below. Hey, what's going on, everyone? Welcome back to the Nonprofit Voice. I'm Nhu Te, Editor-in-Chief of NonProfit Pro, and I'll be your host for today's episode. And as always, thank you so much for joining us today. I am so pleased to introduce today's guest, so please join me in welcoming Vanessa Wakeman to our show. Vanessa is the founder and CEO of the social change agency, the Wakeman Agency, and today she and I are going to dive into the power of social change, and obviously I'm really excited about it. But first, welcome, Vanessa. How are you doing today?
Hello, and thank you for having me. I am super excited about our conversation, so thank you.
Awesome. That's so great to hear. So before we get started, I usually like to ask our guests to learn a little bit more about their background, how you got into the nonprofit sector, and of course, the path that led you to, opening up your very own agency.
Sure. So I was working in financial services on Wall Street for a number of years. And while that was lucrative working for one of the big, Wall Street firms, it was not my passion, and decided I wanted to try something new or just try to do something different with my life, and wanted to be working in something or doing something that I felt had a purpose beyond me, that it was sort of doing good in the world. And we started doing events in PR. I started an agency, literally no experience, no contacts, no nothing, so sort of built it brick by brick. And our very first client was a nonprofit organization. And I had always thought that I'd probably be doing work with corporations around events and PR, but I was so moved by seeing firsthand how the results of our work directly impacted a nonprofit organization. I was hooked. And so I was like, no, I only want this agency to sort of focus on social change and sort of working with nonprofits and socially responsible companies. And we've been doing that for the past 17 years.
Excellent. I really love hearing about people's journey and how they got into the nonprofit sector, because it's always so windy and it's never the intention, right? You go do something in the for-profit world and then you find out, I'm not fulfilled. I feel like I'm not doing anything meaningful. And then they find themselves in the nonprofit sector. And I love how you just decided, you know what, I'm going to open an agency, with no knowledge, and look at you now. I think that's amazing.
Thank you. So not only did I sort of have no contacts and no experience, I also had, unfortunately, the experience of always working in very large companies for the early part of my career. And so I didn't start this company as a sort of like bootstrap scenario. In my head, it's like, you have to go big or go home. And so my very first office was in an office building on 57th Street in Manhattan. I hired a team. I had a phone system put in, I got furniture and paintings and all these things. And I remember the first couple of weeks, our phones were not ringing. And I remember picking up the phone a few times thinking is the phone working? And then it hit me. I was like, nobody knows who you are in this world, right? This is not like I left another agency or I was with another company. You've never done this before. And so I started pretty aggressively hitting the pavement and introducing myself hey, here's where you can find us. Take this business card. Please take this business card. And, slowly but surely start to make connections. And one client led to a second and a third. And, it continued to grow from there.
That's amazing. And how long has the agency been up and running?
So 17th July, we celebrated our 17th anniversary, started
Wow.
in 2003.
Yeah.
And I started the sort of 4th of July weekend, 2003. And I remember saying, like, for me, I am owning like the independence of that for me. Like I am now starting my own journey.
Right.
It's been a great 17 years. Lots of, twists and turns and certainly a number of pivots, but I've loved every minute.
Yeah, and I'm sure you have really seen the evolution of the nonprofit and social good sector, through the 17 years. That's great.
Yeah, there's been a lot of, I think for me, coming out of larger organizations, I've always been a champion for innovation and disruption. And so in my early years of working with the sector, I remember finding myself frustrated about the sector's, quite frankly, the inability to embrace innovation and disruption, until I realized that some of that challenge was really connected to the way funding is set. So they don't sometimes have the luxury to sort of like, sort of dream or color outside of the box. And so just thinking about what I see now, right, as a result of the pandemic, 17 years later, I feel like, oh, wow, this may be an entry point for some real innovation in how funding happens, around how organizations see how they can pivot, how they can change, how they can sort of accelerate progress or think through solutions through a different lens because demand is increased. And so I think that all of the chaos and uncertainty and fear that people are feeling in this moment, I also see an incredible opportunity for transformation for individual organizations and just the sector overall.
I love that. I've always, over the past few years, I've seen and I've, observed that the nonprofit sector is very slow to adopting any kind of technology solution, any kind of innovation, but it's because they are kind of restricted by their budget and by people holding them accountable what they're spending money on.
Right.
So with COVID, it definitely has forced nonprofits to embrace innovation and change and find other ways of fundraising that isn't traditionally the norm.
Yep. Agreed. It's an exciting time, like to push the envelope and see what's possible.
Oh, for sure. All right, great. So let's dive in to talking about social change. Before we get into like the nitty-gritty details of everything, I want to, kind of pick your brain about defining what that really means in our sector. And, I think this year in particular, we're hearing more about what social change actually means and the role nonprofits play. So can you talk about that and what it means to you and how, promoting social change can help drive nonprofit missions forward?
Sure. I think that's a great question. And I think my answer feels really simple. I think social change is progress, right? Movement on important issues. And so I think sometimes we get tangled up in social change having to be this like really complex machine, or that we have to, we've always done it this way, so we need to continue to do it this way, or people are expecting it this way. And I think social change to me is just that, like the second word around change and progress. Like, how do we facilitate progress on the most urgent social issues, the things that impact us? And so like, what does it look like for progress? Is it, instead of, a soup kitchen feeding people, is it creating urban gardens so that people can, have access to food in different ways? Like what is, how do we sort of rethink problems and then accelerate progress on them? That's my definition of it.
Yeah, I love that. It's like not just solving the problem and just taking care of it, but like offering solutions that will kind of like minimize the issue, right? And help people.
Yes. And then the other part of that, I think for me, is one of the things that I ask our clients often, is sometimes people are put off by this, is how do we put your organization out of business, right? And so that doesn't mean I don't want you to have a job, but if we're really focused on change and progress, then we should be solving some problems. right? We should
Right.
not sort of like, oh, year 300, our organization has proudly been at the forefront of what could we be doing differently so that this problem no longer exists. And I can assure people, if they are able to sort of solve the mission or put their organization out of business, you will not have any difficulty finding a job anywhere. Like, people will be hunting you down, wanting to offer you roles. And so really addressing it as a, solutions based, and also from a future or foresight framework of what is the desired end that we want, and how do we re-engineer this process to get there?
Yeah. And that's great. And, for nonprofits, I think it's pretty easy to say, yeah, like we want to create change. We want to, provide solutions. So I'm wondering, what your recommendations are for nonprofits to help their constituents go from just knowing that there's a problem and that needs to be solved to actually like taking action and doing something about it.
Sure. So I think that what's really important is taking the time to think about what messaging you want to communicate, and then also giving yourself as an organization the freedom to sort of raise your hand around the need that may be emerging versus the mission that maybe was. And so sometimes organizations get stuck in like, well, we were, founded on these principles, but, the world around you has changed. And so maybe there needs to be some refinement of the mission in a way that helps people to be more connected to what you're doing in this moment in time. And then giving them sort of creating that urgency around what kind of response you need. And so I think there's some organizations that think just, they want, oh, we just need more awareness for our organization. We need more awareness. The awareness part is definitely a key component, but if you're not creating that call to action, sort of telling me what you need me to do and why I should be aligned with your organization, you are in some ways sort of like, moving in place. And so I think it's sort of being clear around your communications, being clear, having clarity of vision, and making sure that every stakeholder group understands that. Like, I can't tell you the amount of times that we've had conversations with a board versus, mid-level staff versus leadership, and we get different sort of understanding of like the focus or the goals of the organization, sometimes the priorities, the way it's communicated. And so if the people responsible for holding the vision are interpreting it differently, it's probable that the audiences that are being communicated to are not clear on what they should be doing. So I think that's a good first step.
Yeah. It's so incredibly important. I mean, I've talked to a lot of people about, messaging and how are you communicating your mission to your supporters. And the simpler it is, the better, because if it's simple, it's clear, they know what you're asking them to do, and then most likely they will do it if they want to support your organization.
Absolutely. So. And as part of that for our organization particularly, we also are, I am very interested in sort of like the science, the behavioral science behind how people respond. And so I've been researching and sort of integrating into our work how do we align like certain emotions with behavior? And so just think about that more deeply. Like, there's so many different ways to approach this. And I think that we're in a point now where the world at large is sort of more connected to this idea of social change than we've ever seen before. And so if organizations are not sort of preparing themselves or are not ready in this moment to be able to tell their stories in meaningful ways, I think that is like a huge loss.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you say that because, fundraising is not what it used to be. It's not just asking people for money and then being like, here's $5, $10. Now it's, if you want to be successful, you really have to understand the behaviors of people and how to get them to take a certain action. So like understanding the psychology of donors, right?
Yep.
So important.
Yep. Very important.
Great. So obviously, we're talking about how critical nonprofits are to driving social change. And, I want to kind of take a step back and kind of reflect on this year, because I think social change means something different this year, especially than it does in any other year. Between the pandemic that's happening, it being an election year, but also, everything, the injustice that's happening around the Black Lives Matter movement. So what are your thoughts on how nonprofits can better drive social change and really make a difference for these important topics?
Well, I think the biggest sort of element for change to me is understanding or shifting the power dynamic. And so a lot of times, and a lot of interactions I have with nonprofits, they are approaching the conversation about possibilities of engaging, corporations or other stakeholder groups in many ways from a place that does not speak to their power. And the reality is, in my opinion, that nonprofits have a tremendous amount of power just based on the information that they have, their relationships with the communities that they serve, their understanding of the problems, the insights that they have gleaned over, whatever amount of time they've been doing this work. I think that we need to have a shift in power. So one of the things that I would love to see as a result of some of the horrific conditions of 2020 is for nonprofits to have a real seat at the table. So let's not put them through all of these hoops around fundraising, of how, they're spending 2 months on a grant application, or they have to, sign here and offer to give their kidney if they don't meet these measurements. I think we should do away with that and instead be looking at them as, in many ways, the thought leaders about how do we solve these problems.
Yeah.
I think that one of the things that I am excited about is, if things go according to like what I see in my head, then we're going to see a true return to collaboration that speaks to the need for the interdependence between nonprofits, government, and corporate sector to really transform society. And to me, that's so exciting because we've taken a very fragmented approach before. It used to be really reliant on government, and so they stepped away, and then nonprofits have shouldered the burden without all of the resources that they need to be able to do everything. And so now I think that the pandemic and the sort of racial reckoning that is happening has caused corporations to see like, oh shucks, we need to look at this differently because it's beyond just shareholder value, but what is the story that we're telling to our employees, and who do we want to be in the world? And so I think it's a scary time, but it's exciting to me based on the potential for progress and transformation beyond what we've ever seen before.
Yeah, and it's funny that you bring up the corporation side of it, because now they have an image, right? Yep. How are their people who buy their services, buy their goods, how are they viewing them? And so now it's more important than ever for them to show face and be on the right side of history.
For sure. And if I can mention something that we're doing related to that.
Yes, of course.
Today, a shameless plug. We have, we're launching the first ever directory of leaders of color in the nonprofit sector. And we're using that, we're launching something called the Louder Than Words campaign. And what it is an invitation to corporations to identify nonprofits led by people of color, and for them to not make a, quote unquote, charitable gift. We want to get away from that language, but to make an investment in the leadership around, what they think is possible for this organization. So we know that leaders of color in the sector receive a significantly less financial support, and even sort of like leadership development support. And so let's take this opportunity while we're talking about social justice and racial justice to reframe what the responsibility is of, corporate America. And so
Yeah.
we're asking organizations to sort of identify, nonprofits that they are interested in the mission, whether it be in, youth education or, women's reproductive rights, whatever it is, and to identify nonprofits that they want to give money to. And as part of this directory, the nonprofits include something that is a transformation statement that speaks to, like, if, we had this amount of money, we could advance and accelerate our organization's mission, tenfold or threefold, or be able to serve 100,000 people instead of 10,000. And let's really create some sort of fertile soil, if you will, around transformation. So instead of, let's go beyond the black box of late May, where it's like, Black Lives Matter, and we're committed to racial justice. Systemic racism shows up in every aspect of our, lives. And so this is one way that corporations can show that they are willing to invest in Black and brown people in ways that sort of are a multiplier, if you will.
Yeah, it's less about just making a generalized statement. It's like a blanket statement to say, like, hey, I'm part of it, but not really. But it's forcing them to take action and actually prove and show people that they're really about it, right? Making that investment. That's really great. Do you have a link to that by any chance? Because I could totally, link it to the podcast if people are interested in looking at it.
Fantastic. Yes.
Yeah.
It's the louderthanwordspledge.com, and I will happily send you the link as well. And
perfect.
Nonprofit leaders of color are listening, by all means, please submit your organization.
Awesome. Yeah, that's great. I did a diversity cover story in July, where we did talk about the imbalance of salaries, especially, in the nonprofit sector, but like all across the world, between white people and people of color. It's there's definitely, it's a huge gap, and I think that we need to tighten that up.
For sure.
All right, great. So next, I kind of want to touch on, we've seen the power of social media, and I think it's a big driver in driving social change. It gets the word out there, it gets people empowered, it gets people to share and educate themselves and learn more about, the issues that we're facing. So do you have any, advice or recommendations on some social media strategy to promote social change?
Sure. I think a good one, going back to the communications points that I made, is to be clear around what you want people to do. Like, is this a retweet this, or contact your local, elected official? Like, be clear around what the call to action is. To be consistent. It's not you set it and forget it. You post once and then you come back and it's like, oh, our world has changed. That's not how it works. And one of the things that I've learned is also the importance of testing. And so because the social media world is changing so quickly, and there are always more tools and, more voices being added almost every day, you have to test and figure out what works for your audience. And so something as simple as like testing headlines in your email blast, to testing what kinds of posts get the biggest response. So for us, I know that visuals get, sort of graphics that have visuals in it have the biggest response, or certain hashtags, get a certain response, or certain themes get a certain response. Like, really being clear on like your analytics to be able to drive your actions. And I know for a lot of nonprofits, there's always like this, we're in a rush, we're always feeling behind. And so there's sometimes don't feel like they have the resources or the luxury of testing. But once you figure out like how to connect with your people, it is so much, it is worth all of that testing. So on our team, with our own social media and our email marketing, we do a couple of tests to sort of check out like, what are people responding to, or we just posted a something on Instagram that was a graphic that had audio to it, which for the same program that we had done just a flat graphic for and realized that the flat graphic got like 500% more.
Oh, wow.
Like, okay, so let's
Yeah.
do more, you know what I mean? Those.
Yeah.
And so just really trying to pay attention and understand what people respond to. And then also being clear on voice. So are you the authority? Are you trying to sort of position your thought leadership? Are you in need of help? And so you're framing, we're in need. Is it news around your sector or your area of focus? And so understanding who you want to be and how you want to show up in these spaces, I think goes a long way in connecting with audiences.
Yeah. I think social media is misunderstood. I think when people look at it, especially when people don't really understand how it works, they see influencers or they see brands who are successful. They're like, oh, I'll just post here and there and I'll get followers and I'll get exposure and it's going to be fine.
Yeah.
But in reality, that's not the case. You have to, find what works for your organization, because if you're following what someone else is doing, it might not work for your audience and it might not be what they're looking for. So like you said, it's so important to look at the analytics and continue to test different things to see what's resonating and what is, gaining traction with your audience members.
Yes. Agreed.
Lovely. All right. So I have one more question for you. And this is something that I ask every guest that comes on the Nonprofit Voice. And, we talked about a lot today, a lot of heavy stuff. What's one piece of advice you would give to nonprofits if you had the chance?
I would say, particularly in this time, this moment in our country, to really think about thought leadership. I think that there are so many people like being reflective about, like, how do we address this problem? How do we change this? Is this hopeless? Like, can we not do this? And so organizations that are doubling down on like thought leadership and their expertise and their understanding of issues and that sort of challenge the status quo, I think that they can rally real supporters and real support for what they're trying to do. And so this is not the time to be like, oh, this is how we've always done it. This is the time to think about, can we do something new? Can we change the game?
Yeah, I think this is a really good opportunity, this moment in time, for nonprofits to, take a step forward and innovate and try something that's never been done before.
Yes.
And I think it'll help them stand out from the crowd, because there are over 1.5 million nonprofits, and that's just in the US alone.
That's right.
So more likely than not, whatever your mission is, there's going to be a nonprofit down the block doing the same thing. So you got to make sure you're doing something different that's connecting your brand with the people who you're trying to reach. Because at this moment in time, it's all about relationships. It's all about, interacting with people and having them feel a passion and a strong urge to help,
Yes, agreed.
Well, awesome. So that about wraps it up for today's episode. I first want to thank our listeners for listening in on today's podcast. And Vanessa, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been a pleasure speaking to you. So thank you again for joining in on the Nonprofit Voice and sharing your insights and expertise on, why nonprofits are so vital in creating social change and, some strategies and tactics on how they can continue to drive this change.
It was my absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me. And I hope to be invited back in the future.
Of course. I'm going to be, we're going to continue to do this. Is bi-weekly. So, we can definitely revisit in 2021. I would love to have you on again.
That sounds fantastic. Thank you.
Perfect. And on behalf of Nonprofit Pro, we will see you on the next episode of the Nonprofit Voice. Have a great day.